get started. Welcome, everybody. This is Joe Steele, the Communications Director from LIFT. Thank you very much for joining the first Bringing Mind to Market webinar, the first in a series looking at LIFT's efforts and our partners' efforts to develop an educated and skilled advanced manufacturing workforce. Thank you very much for taking time to join us this afternoon and learn a little bit more about what we have going on here at the Institute. A few housekeeping items I'd like to address real quick out of the chute. First, if you can please put your phones on mute, certainly appreciate that, so we'll avoid any background noise as the presentation is going on. Also, we are recording today's session, so you can check back at the LIFT website later on this week, and the session will be posted there, and you can rewatch it, or you can share it with folks who are unable to make it today that you think might be interested in the content we are presenting. You can also take a look at the website and look at the upcoming speakers that we have planned for this series. We have a number of outstanding presentations planned through the rest of the year and into next, so please take a look at that and plan to register. We will be here on the second Tuesday of each month at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so mark those on your calendar, and please register and stay tuned to your email for the registration links. So a little bit about LIFT for those who may not be aware. We are a member of Manufacturing USA. We are one of 14 innovation institutes that are around the country. We are based here in Detroit, Michigan. All of the 14 institutes focus on three different things. They focus on technology R&D. So we focus on lightweight metals. Every one of the 14 institutes has a different technology focus area. Ours is lightweight metals, so we have R&D in that area. We also focus on technology transition. We believe that, what good is developing new technologies if you don't help transition it into the marketplace. And then the third leg is why we're here today, which is helping develop and educate and skilled workforce to take advantage of and have the skills and abilities necessary to utilize the new innovations that are taking place here at the Institute and at the other institutes. So our mission is to revolutionize manufacturing through lightweighting, innovation, and education. We believe that if anything moves by land, in the air, on the sea, or in space, it can be lightweighted to move farther, faster, and more efficiently, which directly benefits the U.S. commercial and defense markets, because it all boils down to cost. If we can lightweight a component, or we can lightweight a system, it may use less energy to produce, it may use less material to produce, it may use less energy to move, and all of that really boils down to making things more affordable and benefiting the defense markets, the U.S. commercial and defense markets. At LIFT, we have over 200 members and partners across the country in industry, in education, in research. We have more than 600 folks that are involved in LIFT initiatives, whether it be a technology initiative and project, or a workforce development and education initiative. So we are more than just the folks here at our headquarters in Detroit. We have a tremendous network around the country, and that's one of the reasons we are bringing this webinar to bear, is to hear from some of those folks that are around the country working with us on some of those projects. I mentioned that we are here in Detroit. We are home to a 100,000 square foot R&D facility. We share this space with IACME, which is one of the other Manufacturing USA institutes. They are based down in Tennessee, but they have some folks that are working up here in Detroit focused on the auto industry. And they focus on composite materials. We have lightweight metals, they have composites, so it makes sense that we are here together in Detroit. To talk a little bit more about our education workforce initiatives, I'd like to invite our Education Workforce Director, Emily DeRocco, to talk a little bit about LIFT and our leadership in that space. Emily?
Thank you, Joe. From its creation, LIFT has been dedicated to investing in an educated and skilled workforce for American manufacturers, and I believe we're now recognized as an institute leader in education and workforce development. In that business line, we have pursued two goals. The first, addressing the skills gap. Our program related to the skills gap includes over 40 investments in partnership to address the gap across the education continuum of K-12, community and technical colleges and universities, in workforce development initiatives, and for incumbent workers. Most of this work has been in the 5 states, which are our immediate footprint, but all of those initiatives are replicable, scalable, and sustainable in the marketplace. Our second pillar of the Education and Workforce Development Program is aligning technology and talent development. But before we jump into that, Joe, I want to share with our listeners and viewers this important initiative. I just want to mention that much of our focus today is to integrate those 2 pillars of the Education and Workforce Development Program into a new, unique national asset, the LIFT Learning Lab, that we and many company and educational partners are building today at LIFT headquarters in Detroit. So more on that to come in a subsequent webinar. Now, back to our focus today on aligning technology and talent development. To launch that major initiative, I asked 2 great partners to take the lead nationally in designing and implementing our approach. Those 2 partners are the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities and the National Center for Manufacturing Sciences. Leading both the initiative and this webinar today is our partner, Jim Waddell, the Vice President of APLU. Jim, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you, Joe. Really appreciate not only being invited to do this with you today, but just very, very pleased to be part of LIFT and the great work that Emily and others at LIFT are leading around education and workforce development, as well as R&D. And I think one of the real opportunities that these institutes have for really leading American manufacturing into and beyond its renaissance is the idea that we're about both the technology and also making sure that we have a skilled workforce to help us deploy those technologies. So we're very happy to be doing this work to that end. So I'm going to try to kind of zip through this presentation so that we have plenty of time for conversation. The project is called Aligning Technology and Talent Development, and what that comes from is an idea that this is sort of what we usually do, right? What you see on your screen now is a picture of a laboratory where graduate students are working on some robotics technology, and they are, working hard to make sure that we are developing the best new technologies so that we can deploy those. And here you see robotics technology in a production environment. So we are trying to always move the technology into the production environment. What we are not necessarily always doing is saying, as we're developing the technology, what is the workforce that we're going to need in order for the technology to succeed and to help us achieve our goals? So what we're trying to do is take the conversation about workforce needs and bring it upstream so that it's happening side by side with the technology development conversation. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how our project works to achieve that kind of goal. What we've done is we've convened a group of folks who are from a number of institutions across the U.S. And who are helping us think through how we can make sure that we are going to have the kinds of workforce needed for these emerging technologies. And as I introduce these folks that we've convened, I'm going to tell you their titles, or at least part of their titles, so that you can get a sense of the expertise that exists in this team. These are all folks who are at institutions of higher education, either universities or community colleges, and they're all material scientists or engineers themselves. So Fazlina Batterdine is at the University of Kentucky, where she works in manufacturing systems engineering. Amy Clark is at the Colorado School of Mines, and she's at at Mines, she's in the Center for Advanced Nonferrous Structural Alloys. Mel Cassette is at Edmonds Community College in Washington. She's also the principal investigator for the National Resource Center for Materials Technology Education. Chad Duty is at the University of Tennessee in Mechanical, Aerospace, and Biomedical Engineering. Muhammad Jahan is at the Miami University of Ohio, and he's in Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering. Jean Liao is at Wayne State University in Electric Drive Vehicle Engineering and Alternative Energy Technology. Kapil Chalil Meratil is at Clemson University, where he works in the departments of Industrial and Civil Engineering. And Kelly Zalesnik is at the Lorain County Community College in Ohio, where she's the Dean of Engineering, Business, and Information Technologies. And so, and by the way, we're very fortunate to be joined by Amy Clark and Kelly Zalesnik today, who will be joining me in the conversation a little later. So what you see is this group of folks who all know about materials engineering and science, but they also know a lot about what it means to translate technology into really high quality education and training. So when we went through the process of selecting this team, we looked for people who had not only the expertise in the technology, but also understood what it was like to think about what the education needs were around emerging technologies. So we call this group our expert educator team. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about how our expert educator team works. By the way, not pictured here is our colleague, Rebecca Taylor from the National Center for Manufacturing Sciences. And Rebecca and I are sort of the co-leads on this team. So this is what our process looks like for the expert educator team. First, we bring the expert educator team together in Detroit. We've done this about 6 times now. And they are brought together with a representative of one of the teams, the technology teams that LIFT has convened in order to undertake the R&D work on a particular technology area. And that representative from the technology team does a presentation, and then the expert educator team, they ask that presenter a lot of questions. They ask questions that I could never ask, but they can because they're material scientists and engineers, and they ask really in-depth questions about how the technology works and really how it's going to change the workplace. And then through that discussion that the expert educator team has both with the technology team and also in deliberations afterwards, they develop a set of recommendations about how institutions of higher education and also how LIFT might work to address the kinds of competencies that are going to be required for these emerging technologies. Then we also hope that these recommendations that we develop will be brought back into the plans that the technology teams are developing so that they actually have not just an R&D roadmap, but they also have a roadmap for translating the R&D activity into education and workforce strategies. And then finally, we undertake outreach to colleges, universities, and others, as we're doing today, to make sure that folks have an understanding of what the recommendations are that we're making. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the ongoing outreach that we're doing in just a few minutes. Just quickly, I wanted you to see the technologies that we have been focused on as part of our work. The first is actually a cross-cutting theme for LIFT. It's Integrated Computational Materials Engineering, or ICME, and this is actually a technology area that is applicable to all of the pillars, the technology pillars that LIFT has, and the individual technologies within those pillars. So the 6 pillars for LIFT are up across the top. We did ICME, and then all of these other technologies are technologies that we've learned about from the technology team representatives and that we've made recommendations about. So what do those recommendations look like? First of all, if you just Google APLU or NCMS or LIFT, any one of them probably, and Expert Educator Team, you'll be able to get to a page where you can take a look at the reports that we've drafted or that we've developed and released so far. I'll be telling you a little bit about some upcoming reports in a few minutes. But in these initial reports, what we did was basically produce the outcomes of the conversations that we had with the technology teams and then among the expert educator team. Essentially, we said, if these technologies are going to be successful, here are the kinds of competencies that we need to be concerned about, whether we're at colleges or universities or we're in industry. And here are some ideas about how to advance strategies towards addressing those competencies. So we provide some recommendations, first of all, in each of these reports for LIFT itself. So we say, hey, you've got this great facility there in Detroit. You've got this incredible network of industry and academe. Here are some ideas about how you might leverage those things to have an impact on workforce development for these technologies. And then importantly, we develop recommendations as well for colleges and universities. And generally, those focus on two different things. One is the competencies that are going to be required. And then the second of what we focus on in our recommendations for colleges and universities are the strategies that an institution might undertake in order to address those competencies. A specific area of focus that has emerged from our work is a focus on work and learn or experiential learning, or probably one of a half dozen other phrases that you could use to describe the idea that it's important for students to experience a working environment, an employer environment as part of the work that they're doing in the classroom or in the curriculum, and as sort of a complement to the classroom, so that they understand the things that they're learning. They understand those things in the context of what it's going to look like in the workplace. And in fact, because of this emerging focus of the conversations we've had in the expert educator team, we also had a special workshop this past June focusing specifically on work and learn and what are some emerging strategies for work and learn to really reimagine what work and learn experiences look like. We've been doing them for years. We've been calling them co-op and internships and externships and other kinds of experiential learning. But what we explored in that workshop were what are the things that we really need to do in order to significantly advance work and learn strategies so that they help address that skills gap that Emily mentioned earlier. Out of that workshop came 4 imperatives, and we have a number of recommendations that we're making with each of these imperatives, and we'll be putting out a publication in the not too distant future that outlines all of this. But essentially our imperatives were that, first of all, students need a better understanding of how their roles intersect in the work environment. And that largely means, sort of at the broadest level, that engineering students need to understand that their roles interact and intersect significantly with technical and production folks in an employer environment. And so they can't learn in a vacuum. They have to learn about their engineering concepts and skills in the context of what those mean in interacting with other roles. And so we talk a little bit about how institutions might think about doing that. We also just sort of advance the idea that really all students should experience work and learn as part of their program. That curriculum must be responsive. We frequently use the word agile and say that we really need to develop better approaches to developing and innovating in our curriculum in order for us to be able to try and develop very effective work and learn models. And then finally, that work and learn really needs to be institutionalized. It can't be just something that's being championed by a few people. If we really want to reimagine how we do work and learn, we have to really think about how it's institutionalized within institutions of higher ed. In this second year of the project, we've really thought about how to drill down on what we learned about those dozen technologies in our first year. And what we have decided to do is to really just take those 12 technologies and go to a deeper level. So first of all, we're preparing a final report that will not only include, a much more in-depth introduction than we've done in the current reports. It'll also include sort of the compilation of education and workforce strategies, and also for each of the technologies, the competencies that are related to that. And also some resources that educators can use. Importantly, as we talk about competencies, one of the things that we've designed for our final report, and also some materials that we're developing to go along with each one of the technologies, is an idea that there are supporting competencies and there are critical competencies. And so if you look at any of our first three reports, you'll just see sort of a laundry list of competencies for each one of the technologies. Well, how we're refining that now in the second year of the program is that we're saying, well, let's focus on the 3 to 5 most important supporting competencies and the 3 to 5 most important critical competencies. And the supporting competencies, we're looking at those as competencies that are probably already addressed in the curriculum, but we're wanting to highlight them and say, these are very important as this particular technology gets deployed. It's important to look at these things that you're already doing in the curriculum. So what we do is we say, you're probably already covering these, and here's where you're probably already covering them in, an introductory materials course or in a manufacturing processes course. Then the critical competencies are the 3 to 5 competencies that are not likely currently addressed in the curriculum. And so what we include there is not only identifying what those competencies are, but some ideas for how to include them in the curriculum or address them. And what I'd like to introduce to you is a piece of what's going to be in these final materials that we put together, because what we wanted to do is not just say, here's a competency and here's something that people need to know or be able to do, but we want to give you a sense of the level to which they need to know or be able to do that thing. So we created something called thinking and doing maps, and we adapted this from the scholarly references here below, but it's an article and a body of work that has been done, which is really all around Bloom's taxonomy and an adaptation of Bloom's taxonomy. So what we've done is we've created what we're calling maps. They're really a matrix, and on one axis is a cognition scale from remembering to creating, and a number of points in between. And on the other axis is a thinking scale or a knowledge scale from factual to metacognitive, and a number of points in between there too. And this is what sort of it looks like. This is very, very much a prototype, but what we're doing with these maps is we're saying, for each of the competencies, here's the level at which it's important for students to understand these things. And we think that by providing these maps, what we're doing is we're helping faculty in engineering programs and program or department chairs to really kind of have a conversation about, are we addressing these things? Are we addressing them in the right place and at the right level with the right kinds of outcomes? So we're going to provide a little map that shows where in the level of thinking and doing students need to be around the particular competencies that we're recommending. So that gives you a big and very short overview of kind of the project that we've been underway with. And in a few minutes, I'm going to ask Amy Clark and Kelly Zalesnik to join me in a little bit of a conversation about the work that we've been doing. But I also wanted to just give you a quick preview to something that we hope is coming down the pike in the not too distant future. Based on what we've learned through this process, we've been thinking about an idea that we're calling multi-environment work and learn. And we hope to get some funding to support our ideas around this and help us to design and develop the concept. But essentially, because we've discovered that work and learn is so important to these new competencies, what we also know is that understanding working and learning in different kinds of environments is also important, because it's important for students to not understand just what technology looks like in production, but also what it looks like as it's being developed. So we have a concept for a work and learn model that would engage students not only in an employer environment, and you see that listed here, which is generally what we think of when we think of work and learn, especially with things like co-ops and internships, But we also want to expose students to an innovation laboratory, so like LIFT, where they have not only that learning lab that Emily mentioned, but a significant manufacturing floor facility, essentially, with a number of different types of equipment that address these kinds of technologies. And we also think that important work and learn can happen in R&D facilities that campuses have, that universities have right on site. Often in those facilities, by the way, bringing industry people together with academics, just as they do in the innovation laboratory at LIFT. So not a lot of detail on this. This wasn't the point of my presentation today, but I did want to say that, we've got this idea about kind of moving to a new frontier with work and learn, and we hope that we'll have some more ideas to share with you about the multi-environment work and learn in the not too distant future. But for now, I'd like to just have a few minutes of conversation with my colleagues, Amy and Kelly, who are on the Expert Educator team and who've been doing this work with us. And after we have a few minutes of discussion, we're going to open it up, and I know Joe is going to facilitate some discussion with all of you. So please start thinking now. If you haven't already got a question or two that you'd like to jump in with, please start thinking now about what those questions might be.
Yeah,
Amy,
this is Joe. Sorry, Jim.
Sorry,
I
Joe.
wanted to I failed to mention earlier that if you do have a question, please use the GoToMeeting taskbar. There's a chat function there, and you can address the question to the organizer. That'll help facilitate the Q&A a little bit later on. So I forgot to mention that earlier. So go ahead, use the toolbar and use the chat function and address it to the organizer.
Thanks a lot, Joe. So just for a little bit of conversation with my colleagues, Amy and Kelly, about the process, I'll start with you, Amy. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about essentially your experiences or our experiences with the Expert Educator team. What do you think are some of the important things that we've learned over the last 18 months about how we can better do this alignment of technology development and deployment with education and curricular strategies?
So first, I guess I'd like to say that I think we've learned that we really need to understand the different technologies and also have dialogue with the relevant stakeholders. In this case, it was the technology team representatives, and we really need to get at understanding what the needs are. I think we also, as you mentioned, really need to understand what are the critical competencies and what are supporting competencies. So basically, what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed both at the 2-year level and the 4-year level as well. We also need a good understanding of the multidisciplinary nature of these skills as well. And then the important thing to ask is, how can this map onto existing course offerings? Or is there something that we should be doing differently? Do we need to develop new modules? Do we need to think about experiences that could be had in the LIFT Learning Lab or the LIFT High Bay, for example? I think those are some of the things that we've really learned in our time together so far.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And I would say just that multidisciplinary thing is not something that I spoke a lot about in the presentation, but that's certainly been, it's sort of along the same lines of the multi-level kind of thing, where we know that engineering students need to be learning alongside technical and production or say community college or 2-year program students in order to really get a sense of how these technologies, how we'll work with these technologies in the employer environment. Kelly, what are your thoughts about what we've learned?
So, I really agree with Amy. We've learned that obviously as new technologies emerge, we have to understand what's unique about those technologies and where they fit, in the program we have. What is it that we need to shore up? That what already exists, but and emphasize. But then also, how do we take that information and make it easy for faculty to embed in their programming? No one wants to have to start over from ground one. So if we can take that information and just like with these maps, competency maps, help faculty figure out at what level do they need to teach it and where do they need to embed it, and if we can give them some of that content as it's being created, so that they can very quickly embed it into their training or into their educational programming, it will allow us to be more on point with the technology as it emerges, and hopefully have an educated workforce ready to go.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I really liked your phrase shoring up, because I know that a lot of our conversations as we've been sitting in that room at Lyft over the last couple of years have really been around the fact that, new technology does not necessarily mean that everything has to be overturned in terms of the curriculum. Really, it's about trying to find the places where we already are doing a good job making sure that certain competencies are addressed and highlighting those, and then also making sure that we are addressing those places where there are some critical new things that are really required of the curriculum in order to make sure that these competencies are in fact addressed. So Kelly, I'd like to start with you this time. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what we've discovered about why work and learn is so important as we've had these conversations with the technology teams.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. So what we have learned, or what we've discovered about work and learn, is that it creates what I'll call sort of this closed loop environment for staying current. So as we provide students with work and learn opportunities, the course content that they're receiving in their education really starts to make sense to them. But then they also come back with questions for faculty about, well, I'm learning this out while I'm working in this content area. And so that really then pushes faculty to, meet with industry and stay current. And, sometimes it's, faculty might have some tough questions to answer or some investigating to do, but it helps keep this currency that if students are actually working and learning at the same time, rather than waiting till the end of a co-op period for a faculty member to read a report, they're being pushed while they're lecturing to talk about some content areas that maybe they hadn't considered. So I think it really creates this tight connection between faculty and students and the technology, as it is state of the art and as it's emerging. And that really gives faculty also an opportunity to, on the fly, embed new content into their lectures. And I think that's kind of exciting for faculty, because, sometimes, they just sort of, they deliver what they deliver, but, if they can keep it fresh every semester and sort of upgrade it, it's a lot less burdensome than an overhaul.
Right.
And, it's fresh for them.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Kelly. I really like your sort of articulation of how what this does, what work and learn does, is really brings closer together essentially the classroom experience, the sort of industry environment, and really students' needs at the center of all of that. So that's fantastic. Amy, did you have anything you'd like to add about what we discovered about why work and learn is so important around these emerging technologies?
Sure. So one thing I think it's important to think about with respect to work and learn is access. So is something going to be virtual? Is it going to be hands-on in, using a screwdriver in a laboratory, for example? So access, I think, is important to consider. Another thing with work and learn is it allows you to experience the latest technology developments, which is really critical. And it also allows for a better understanding of not only the opportunities, but also the limitations of a given technology too. And then another thing I think is really important is this integration of skills. For example, you might be completing something that requires understanding of robotics and materials, for example, at the same time. So really getting back to that multidisciplinary nature piece of it.
Great, thanks, Amy. That we've a number of our recommendations, as you know, and we'll share with the folks here, have been around how we do provide access. Really appreciate your bringing that issue up, because when you're dealing with emerging technologies, it's hard to think about work and learn because there aren't a lot of places where you can work with these emerging technologies. And that kind of leads to a set of recommendations that we've given to Lyft, and we've been excited to see Lyft thinking through as they build out their high bay and their learning lab in terms of how to create access to those tools that they have there, some of which don't exist anywhere else, or they don't exist in production or deployment yet. So we hope that LIFT can, use its position as an innovation lab to really provide that kind of access. And by the way, that also is sort of what's led to this idea of a multi-environment work and learn, where students can get exposure to technologies in different environments. So, and all of that we've learned about work and learn, I think also says a little bit about how we need to work better with industry. And rather than ask a question about that right now, I think I'll just quickly say something about how we can better connect with industry. And then I think we want to try to open this up to some discussion with all of you. So again, please do make sure you're submitting those questions. What I'll say about working with industry is, obviously, first of all, if work and learn is going to work, it needs to have the people who are on the work end just as engaged as the people who are on the learn end, right? So we need to have really good partnerships with industry. We can't just invent and deploy work and learn as colleges and universities on our own. Last November, APLU put out a paper called Ready for Jobs, Careers in a Lifetime. And in that paper, we talked about whether we talked about the fact that we wonder whether we talk too often about a skills gap, when really what we have is an engagement gap. We have an engagement gap between industry and institutions of higher education, and we need to close that gap if we're ever going to really close the skills gap and find opportunities for students to have those experiences. So we've learned a lot about, and hopefully we're going to be making some helpful recommendations about how institutions of higher education can connect better with their partners in industry to think through these things. With that, I can certainly think of some more questions, Joe, if I need to ask Amy and Kelly and continue the conversation. But do we have some questions from folks that are participating with us today?
We do. Thank you very much. There is some agreement going on in the chat about the importance of work and learn. But one of the questions that came up was, since it might be difficult to integrate the results of a specific research project into more broad-based, 2 to 4 year or work experience training, how do you capture key skill sets and disciplines like CAD or fundamental disciplines that's relevant to advancing technology? So I think the question is about, we're looking at a lot of specific technology programs, but how do you take those key skills and broaden them out to a wider audience?
That is a good question. Amy or Kelly, do either of you have some thoughts that you'd like to try to tackle that with?
So what I think we've had the luxury of doing, this is Kelly, is we've been able to meet with those folks, at LIFT who are working on research projects. And, we've hypothesized what we think those skills are and, what the nuances are, and are those research areas, are they still in research, or are they, from a research or production level, a TRL level, where are they? And, so we ask the experts, we say, well, this is what we think, did we get it right? And sometimes they come back and say, well, no, that's still really in the research phase. We're probably not ready with that, but these are the other skills, that are very important. So we've had the luxury of being able to talk with the experts. And I think, depending on who the faculty are or where this information or the genesis is, we want to keep that going so that, the experts can help us, give us feedback on, yes, this is right, or no, I would add this. So that's how we've been approaching it. Amy, did I miss anything?
I guess I'd also like to say that we try to figure out what are sort of cross-cutting themes, things like ICME, for example, or for example, CAD might span multiple projects that we're looking at. So it's really trying to understand and compartmentalize a little bit those different skill sets as well, and sort of what's cross-cutting and what isn't.
Yeah, thank you both. And I would, go ahead.
This is Emily. I just want to pop in here that I think the importance And I'm also reading Pat and Tom's dialogue through the chat box. The importance about this cross-cutting skills leads to the emphasis that our expert educator team has taken on competencies and the integration of competencies in educational programming. If we do that right, it's generally not about one or even a couple technologies. It's about supporting a lot of technology development, number one.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about a single sector either. In many cases, those competencies are shared across economic sectors. So I do think that we're very cognizant of the importance of the cross-competency engagement and how that better serves students and certainly employers ultimately with their workforce.
Yeah. And that's similar. Thank you, Emily, for chiming in. I think that's similar to something I was going to say, which is, that I think, we're not suggesting, I don't think we're suggesting that work and learn is something that needs to be done for specific emerging technologies. I think a lot of what we've learned is that these emerging technologies are not, they're essentially kind of highlighting for us in a way that hasn't happened before the need for certain kinds of skills that you really it's almost like you have to be able to make connections between content and the actual environment in which that content is being used. And it doesn't matter which technology we're talking about, and it also doesn't matter whether we're talking about an old technology or a new technology. It's just that the newer technologies are really highlighting for us this critical need to experience the content in the context of essentially a production environment. And as Emily said, that's not limited to one sector. In fact, it's not limited to engineering or even technical fields. I mean, I think what we're going through now in higher education even more broadly is an understanding that you don't have a full education until you've experienced the content in the context in which you're going to be applying it. So that's really a lot of, it's the broader idea here. And I hope that addresses the question in terms of dealing with specific skill sets. I think the other thing that's true about that, and it goes back to my note that we have to have good engagement between higher education institutions and employers, because we have to talk through those very things. Look, this work and learn might be focused on X particular technology or sets of technologies, but we really need for them to experience these things as part of the work and learn. So we have to design it very carefully to be aware of what they're getting exposed to.
Excellent. Good discussion, everyone. Another question that came in related to work and learn and the collaboration between educators and industry is how has industry provided input about its needs and tailoring what students are learning in that programming? And have there been pathways created or employment opportunities for students due to these recommendations? Or are we still kind of early in that? Probably still too early in that. But how have we engaged industry with these discussions with the curriculum being developed at colleges and universities?
That's a great question. Amy, do you want to talk about what your experience has been at Mines in terms of how you currently engage industry in curriculum?
Sure, I could do that, but I guess from the LIFT point of view as well, I guess the different technologies that we're looking at are actually being driven by industry. The scope of the work is being driven by industry, so they are industry problems. So that's one important thing. So industry really is sort of defining those skills that we need to look at those projects, right? So that's one thing that's really important. Here at Colorado School of Mines, we do a lot of industry-centric research where, again, the scope of the work is defined by industry, and students work on those projects and have industrial mentors as well. And so that's a really powerful way to directly link industry with students and really get a good understanding of what the needs are.
Great, thank you, Amy.
Jim?
Kelly, do you? Yeah.
sorry, I'm going to chime in once.
I was going to come to you, Emily.
Okay, but Amy triggered this, and I think that this is an important consideration for everybody on this call. The other critical component of our move forward in driving this into education with the industry perspective strongly at the home or at the wheel, so to speak, is the importance of faculty who have had industry experience. What we saw, and this is hats off to the expert educator team. If anybody thinks this translation work is easy work, it is not on either side, but the technology team members from industry who also had some experience, whether it was on adjunct faculty or teaching, were far more proficient at communicating with the educators and vice versa. The educators who have had some industry experience get it or got it more quickly. So I just want to point out that industry educator cross-fertilization is really an important view for us as we look forward to both faculty development and our educator development.
That is a great point, and definitely again, when we talk about work and learn, these kinds of things really come to the fore in terms of sort of recognizing that these, and Emily said this is a lot harder than anybody thinks it is. All of this is harder. It takes a sort of a deliberate and thoughtful processes to sort of reconcile and bring together sort of what are sort of broad educational goals as well as very specific and context-specific skills that need to be developed. I wonder, Kelly, if you could share a little bit of the industry engagement perspective from the Lorain County Community College.
Yeah, so, one of the things that we've learned is that, we define, if we work with industry as co-developers of a curriculum, right then and there, we start to have faculty and industry talking to each other about what's important. And, it helps faculty understand that when they think a certain course is important to be included in a curriculum, industry may say, no, not really. We don't really need this, and so it's good for faculty to hear that because, left to their own devices, they may conceive of something that really is off the mark. So we really try and involve, as we develop any, new programming or make changes, we try and involve industry. And that requires that we have a good relationship with industry, but we really try and involve them in the development of the content so that, they know what we're delivering and what they're getting. That also makes it easier for us to ask for placements for students in work and learn models because then industry has had a seat at the table in the design of the program, and so they can get behind finding funding or taking on a student after so many semesters because, they have a sense of what that student has learned and what experience, what they're going to be able to provide to the company in terms of value, even as a student. So, we're really trying to be much more deliberate and, upfront with industry, and where we haven't been in the past, we're really working to sort of correct that and say, hey, today is a new day. Would you come help us look at our curriculum and see, what we need to do to make sure that it's meeting your needs. So, we're doing that on multiple fronts, and it really makes a huge difference. And then it also creates that relationship for faculty to work with industry, and especially for those that may not have worked in industry, this is really crucial. And then it allows us to look for opportunities to get those faculty out into industry on a sabbatical or through some other mechanism.
Yeah. I think, key word in what you just said, Kelly, is relationship. And I think sometimes, or I think actually a lot of times, to our detriment, we think about all of this in very transactional terms. Essentially, if industry just sort of defines for us what the competencies are, then, throws them over the wall to those of us on the education side, we'll be able to figure out what to do with them. Or if we just kind of walk through the kinds of things that we think are important in the curriculum and then push students out into the industry environment, then everything will just work out. And we know that that doesn't work. And I think what you said about relationships is really kind of the critical key there, right? It's about developing relationships, because we're not going to be able to develop these experiences in a way that is effective if we don't have those relationships. And my own experience of this was internships as an undergraduate. I felt like I was just sent off to an industry environment, and there was no interaction at all between that industry partner and the institution. I was not even asked to really make direct connections between my curriculum and what I was learning in the industry environment. And so that relationship, I think, is a really critical part of how we are developing students, whether it's a work and learn situation or even just helping us think through the curriculum. It's about a relationship. It's not about some kind of transactional, we're going to gather information from you and then implement it sort of thing. Joe, do we have any others?
Yeah, we have a few more minutes left, and I think it leads into some comments that were just being made on the chat. Kind of follows up on what you were just saying, and what some folks out there might be thinking in terms of big picture. What does this look like in the end? And is it about further developing those relationships with industry and educational institutions through those work and learn opportunities to kind of build that ecosystem so that the schools and industry members are working together in the end? Is that kind of the big picture? Because it seems to me, according to the comments, that employer involvement isn't as much as it should be, and there really should be more. So is that a direction that you're seeing that we need to go through your work here?
What was the direction again?
The direction of really having more industry input in terms of what is being taught in these colleges, universities, and really developing those relationships.
Yeah. Well, so I'll give a quick answer to that, and then I would definitely love to hear what others think. But my answer to that is, it's not just industry input. It's the relationship. It's making sure that it's industry and institution of higher ed working together. So absolutely, it's industry input. It's also institution of higher ed input. In other words, that it's a collaboration. It's about co-creating, as Kelly was describing happens at Lorain County Community College, where it's really a back and forth. So absolutely it's input, but it's not just sort of saying industry input. It's about industry engagement from my view. Kelly, Emily, Amy, any other thoughts on that?
So I'll say it's definitely an ongoing relationship. I'm thinking of one particular program that has really informed the work that we're doing in other programs. And we started out with a very small program where students didn't understand, what even was the job and who are the employers. And we brought 7 employers to the table, and and they were very upfront. They were small. They said, we're not sure we can hire anyone. And we said, we don't care. We want you to have input into, the degree that we're developing and creating, and make sure it's what you would want. And, that was maybe 3-4 years ago. And we now have 42 employers, and not all of them take students every semester, but they, as a collective, have provided great insight, and the students that we have in the program are in great demand and are all offered positions before they graduate. And what it's done is, it's allowed the faculty, they have an ongoing conversation with these employers, all of them, every month. They're constantly talking to them about what are the new trends are you seeing. It's not about having an advisory committee meeting once or twice a year and, sort of looking over curriculum and nodding your head. It's about what's going on in your field right now, what's causing it to change, what do I need to do with my curriculum to keep my students current. And it happens, that he's meeting for coffee, having a quick phone chat, going out for breakfast, around his teaching schedule, with these faculty, and so, or with the industry. And, he's welcome at their facilities. They welcome our students when we send them out. So, for opportunities with work and learn. And I think it's made this just really tight integration. And we are continually looking for additional companies, because the broader it is, the better the opportunity for the student at the end of their educational programming.
That's great. Thanks, Kelly. Amy?
I definitely think the engagement piece, which you mentioned, Jim, is really important. As I mentioned, a lot of times we'll have research projects with a company that's sort of driving the scope of the work, and they'll serve as an industrial mentor, and the students will periodically check in with them. And then that's when you really see that engagement, when you see the back and forth between the faculty, student, and a company, right, really driving the scope of work. And so that's how you really align, I think, with the industry needs. But yeah, I think the engagement piece is really important.
Yeah, and the one last thing I want to say, Joe, I know you need to wrap it up, is I just wanted to point out that Pat Hilberg, who's joined us, mentioned that it's always about, for him, culture. And it really is. I think that's the challenge, is that when this is too transactional, when we think about it just as input from one side or the other, we don't necessarily think about building that relationship. And when we do build that relationship, we have an opportunity, as Pat suggests, to break down the barriers that are created by the very different cultures in the academy and in the workplace.
Thank you very much.
This is Emily. Jim, do you mind just one parting thought as well? I do think that we are at the front end, and the expert educator team's initiatives have helped develop for us what I would call a major disruption in education and workforce development in this country. And that disruption is a good one that will drive more and more models of industry and education determining together. Maybe not the traditional ways to build educational pathways, but very non-traditional ways to accelerate and assure that we are teaching and learning in learning institutions and in industry the kind of skills that result in great employment opportunities, job creation, and careers for everybody.
Thank you very much for that. And in the spirit of it not being a one-way street and building collaboration and relationships, you guys on your screen see the email addresses of the presenters here today. So thank you very much, Jim, Amy, and Kelly, for your participation. So you can reach out to them with any further questions you might have, and you can also reach out to us here at Lift. You can follow us on social media. You can reach out to us via our website. You can reach out to Emily directly as well. But I wanted to thank everybody, thank the presenters today. Thank you, Emily, for helping put this together as well. And to everyone, please stay tuned to your email and the Lift website, as we are here next month on the second Tuesday of the month, as we introduce our Ignite Manufacturing Masters curriculum that is currently under development. So thank you so much. We certainly appreciate everyone taking time today, and we look forward to having you next month.